Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. The hardest detail to reproduce, proper depth, which is for me the room for everything to exist at the same time. I believe that classical music is most likely the most difficult music to play in general. And at a high level, it keeps on surprising you and keeps you interested. If you ever listen to, for example, any random classical piece of music in your car on the way to work, you'll most likely notice that lots of times that stuff just doesn't keep you interested. And I would say it has a huge amount to do with the noise that exists in a system. So when you're driving to work or wherever it is, there is a huge amount of noise coming from outside of the car, that you can hear in the car. So you'll most likely have to turn up the volume quite a bit just to hear the sound. And because of that, the whole system is like pumping and just going, confusing your senses a lot. So I also find that when you measure, let's just measure some music. Let's say that you're measuring Katie Melua when that plays. Katie Melua music is some of the easiest music to play that you can basically play on all systems out there. The power pull that you have when you're running that. If you would put like a watt meter on the equipment that you have, you would notice that when you play Katie Melua, it's at a very stable watt, because there isn't a lot of volume, there isn't a lot of traffic with a lot of instruments. It just isn't very fast paced and with a lot of stuff happening. It's very smoothed out and made in a way so basically sounds good and everything, like Louis Armstrong, Elvis, Dire Straits, Diana Krall, stuff like that. That's easy music to play because it doesn't require as much as some of the other types of music. Like if you wanted to play Metallica at a mid-high volume or any other metal or aggressive rock band, that stuff is pretty hard to play in a way so it fully draws you in and you want to listen to it for a long time without it fatiguing your hearing. Same especially with classical music, because especially when you're dealing with classical music, then you're really dealing with the genuineness of the instruments, the separation of the different compartments. So you could have like a harp and a piano close to each other. So if you had it on a bad system, that would just be like a two-dimensional harp somewhere out there in the orchestra. You couldn't tell if it was up here, here, here. You could just hear that there's a harp and then there's a piano, and then you can hear like with the volume of the harp, it just like comes and goes in an unstable way, just like the piano comes and goes, and because it has such an unstable volume, a lot of the other stuff going on around here, we just can't place it, and when you can't place things come overwhelming, confusing. You just lose interest. Everything just seems uninteresting, gray, ugly, insignificant. So yeah, so we want to hear all the instruments in an orchestra, and we want it all to be heard at the same time without it being rushed, overemphasized, or suppressed. This is a very difficult thing to do. I've almost never heard this, only in some very few systems. The thing I noticed is that when you go, let's just say that this is a low level of music and this is a high level up here, where I have my mouse. The thing I notice is that when you start at a low level down here, is that usually there's not a lot of detail. And then once you get up and up and up and up, of course, more details, appear. But the problem is that even though a lot more detail appears, sorting that detail in a believable way where you have a deep level of warmth, a deep timbre, deep decay, feeling the intention of the artists. You don't get that a lot in these lower levels, you usually have to start off with something around here, which for me would be something like, Macintosh mid-level gear. Then you perhaps get slightly above that, which is the higher level Macintosh gear, and then you get the ear, the Jadis, and then you've got stuff like the good YBA and the Burmeister and the FM Acoustics and the Goldmund, and and just building up and up and up in quality. And then you maybe close to the end here have something like Negra, Spectral, Kondo, something like that, and then in the end, the good audio note gear from the mid to the high level. That's how I see it. So when we're dealing with a lot of this lower gear here, when you're listening to reviews from other channels, other people that just generally on the internet, they constantly talk about detail and decay and bass bump and stuff like that. I mean, all of this stuff is relevant that they mention, but you have to realize that most of the times when people are talking about detail, they're just talking about detail, not detail with substance, with heart, where you feel like if you don't listen to this track of music, you're gonna die. You don't get that feeling with a lot of gear out there. That's the point that I'm trying to make. And the thing that I've noticed is that the more that you go up in class, usually, the more it has a tendency of giving you, of course, a more full and good detail. But the thing I see a lot of people do is that they get stuck at around here, this area, not realizing all of this gear up here on this scale. Because once you get up to around here, and you start listening to stuff like Acouphase and Tannoy, that gets pretty believable for a lot of people, including myself in the start, that is the end destination. But what I generally hear with systems like that is that, yes, it is a hell of a lot better than most other gear in the world. Believe me, it is. But they usually generalize music in a way so that when you're listening to drums, it kind of deafens out a lot of the other stuff, so it gets too much of a priority, and it becomes a bit, the warmth becomes a bit too big and boosted and not fully integrated with the mid-range and the treble, and all the parts kind of get pulled from each other, almost like it's being, I wouldn't say over-engineered, but like it's being pulled apart and processed in a cheap computer. And I feel that a lot of people, if they want the really good sound, they have to kind of go past that gear and look for really esoteric brands. It could still be Acouphase and Tannoy if you found some really good ones, but I feel that many times when you listen to systems out there, they're just tuned in to listening to music like Dire Straits, Katie Melua, all of this easy music, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Summertime, for example, Hugh Masekela. A lot of this stuff that just is pretty easy to play. It could also be perhaps a bit more sophisticated stuff like Alan Taylor, Color to the Moon, or some other stuff. But you never hear, when you have a really good system, or like a better system, you never hear people inviting another male friend over and then listening to stuff like John Denver, or like a really bad recording of Janis Joplin, or Led Zeppelin on CD or something like that. It happens very rarely, and that's because those are things that are so much more difficult to play, and you need not only a good system but a really good amount of talent for setting that up so it sounds good. So yeah, let me just continue into the text here. I've repeated this on some of my previous videos, that I feel constantly when I listen to a lot of systems in the world that it has to some degree a problem fully unloading the music while maintaining all the current detail and keeping on adding detail to it. So you know, you have this musical score here. You have the violins building up with the piano and the harp, and then like halfway mid in the track, you've got perhaps cymbals, bass drum, and you know, a gong. And when these details appear, it's almost as if when they appear, they then get too much focus, so all the other stuff kind of disappears, you know. And I feel that a bit sad, and I feel that many times that has to do with us not giving enough focus on the source part of the sound, which is the streamer, which is the CD player, which is the turntable, the reel tape, whatever. I feel that if we gave that a lot more attention, all of these things, as you can see on the screen here, all of these instruments would exist together in a stable volume where you could still hear them all in the band, but you could hear them there while you also heard a clear definition of the separation between them. You could hear the full fleshed out quality of the instrument, like I've written here, where it's a 10 out of 10, that it's got this warm, timbre, soulful way of playing. And you could hear the variation of volume control, not being panicky and jumpy and having this like flat way of pumping out detail. Like I've written here, you know, either you hear a system that's to some degree suppressed, or it's pumping out in an uncontrolled way. I heard my friend with the Yamaha stream was telling me that constantly. You know, he's at such a high level that every time he visits basically anyone, he has to go within like 10, 15, 20 minutes because he just gets a headache listening to it. Because once you get to hear that really good sound, you start hearing how everything is just so messy, and it's either being totally over controlled and suppressed, or it's just going like pumping out and everything's happening and you can't mentally figure out what's going on because there's not enough time. The noise floor isn't low enough for everything to kind of find its place. So yeah. Very interesting consideration, and top of this, you know, you also want the full smash factor on all instruments, you know, and you want it gradually building up and then totally releasing that energy, and then without it shouting or jumping or other stuff or having some kind of a bias, you know. That's difficult, you know, but that's basically the end destination of sound. The more that you can do all of this together as a whole, the better it gets. And you get a lot of these, you know, retro systems, pretend hi-fi systems where it sounds good, you know, it's interesting. It's got this warmish, organic type of sound. It's got a bit of kick, a bit of that, a bit of everything. But when you play complex passages on it, where you have a whole orchestra here, you just hear how it all collapses, and you just, you know, within a couple of minutes you're just already over to another thing that interests you more. So, and that's why we listen to stuff like Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, stuff like that. It's because there's a select way of pushing traffic through the music that is less demanding of our equipment. And of course, listening to a Drake song will then sound many times a lot better than listening to classical music. And then you might think, listening to your own music, that I never really liked classic music. Not really my thing. It's a bit boring. It's a bit grey. I'm not sure. Most systems in the world can't play a random album from an orchestra, classic orchestra, in a full hour's time going through both sides of the album. They just can't. They can't make it relevant and interesting so that you're like on the edge of the seat and going like, oh wow, you know. It's difficult. It's difficult making all of that stuff happen at the same time while still drawing you in and having that new experience, because it's so much easier creating a song that's 3, 4, 5 minutes long and then just giving you some dynamic contrast, a lot of dark sound, distortion, a bit of auto tune here. We're gonna remove some artifacts, and then we're gonna, like, you know, it's almost like it's a trickery of the brain that goes on that makes that sound relevant and interesting, you know. And dealing with that on a large scale with real instruments, you know, once you hear real instruments on a half bad piece of equipment, you start to lose interest, because you start hearing how sucky your own gear is, simply because in order to play instruments, you need a very good piece of equipment. It's not enough just having an expensive piece of equipment set up. I've seen a lot of systems, you know, a lot of systems from brands like regular models of Yamaha, regular models of Denon, a lot of stuff from Macintosh, Past Labs, Mark Levinson. A lot of that stuff was generally really good with a lot of individual tracks. But as soon as you put something like any classical music on, almost, it just lost its relevancy. It seemed grey. It seemed like, yeah, I'm not really into this kind of thing. You know, that level of urgency where you're deep into the sound and you're there, you're reaching for the tissues, crying your heart out, you know. You don't get that with a lot of these systems. You know, you usually have to go, you know, down to the lower systems where you're getting a bit of added warmth, a bit of help, you know. And then you probably get down to, I don't know, like a Macintosh MC275 or a JJ 828, or like a warmish, tubish sound, maybe triode amp or whatever. And then you can start listening to real instruments again, you know. And then, yeah, but you still don't get everything, you know. It's like a boosted type of sound that in a way is better, but in another way structurally isn't as good, you know. It doesn't have that same black level, it doesn't have that same separation and attack, so you're kind of stuck, you know. Should you go for the really crappy gear or the pretend hi-fi? And I'm here to say that you shouldn't go for either of them. You should start. I feel personally that if you want really good music, you should start with something like Aquaphase, a good Aquaphase amplifier on a good tannoy speaker. You know, start in that area, or like start with a good mid-class YBA Passion integrated amplifier. Set up on something like a Verity speaker or a Lawrence Audio speaker or Audio Solutions Figaro XXL, you know. Then we're really starting to get into the more of the substance of the sound, you know. And then from that point on, we can get into some slightly better gear like Ear or EAR, that's how it's spelled, or Jadis, or, you know, even better stuff like FM Acoustics, Goldman, even better stuff, Negra, even better stuff, Spectral, Condor, or, you know, there we're really, you know, in the end, there we're really getting into the true essence of music, and there we can really listen to, you know, basically all types of music. I mean, even stuff like Negra can be a bit difficult to listen to, you know, random classical music, even though it's some of the best gear in the world. You know, you still have to use a lot of time on setting up your room, your speaker, the equipment, so it's a full Negra setup, and you need a damn good source for that still to sound good. But still, you can make it sound really good. It's very good gear. But still, even though you have, and that's the problem. Once you go up in class, you're opening up for so much detail that you need a crazy good source to stabilize the sound, a crazy good power network. When I say power network, I'm talking about power bar, really good power cables, not just expensive ones, but it could be cheaper ones, but stuff that works, that has a really good coupling with that specific gear that you've got in that specific room. And then it's an art. I can't give you the exact recipe for doing it, but it's an art. And once you are able to control that art, you can get all of these things that I'm talking about. It is a reality that does exist. I've heard it only a couple of times, but I'm telling you guys, it's really good once you get into that zone. So, yeah, you basically have to create a very low noise floor for this to exist. And it's easy when we're dealing with these like slightly lower systems that in order to get that noise floor, we are many times suppressing the sound so much that instruments don't really sound like proper instruments, and because they don't sound like proper instruments, you are then going to listen to structurally based music, which is stuff like Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, whatever new stuff that's been made that's popular. I know I'm generalizing, but there aren't any other people in the world basically saying these things. This is stuff that you only get to find out once you've usually used a couple of $1,000,000 and tried everything out there. So I'm telling you guys this not to say that you've got a shitty system because you can't listen to classical music. I'm telling you guys this as a way of recognizing that is the bar. That is where you need to go. That is how you can orientate. Yeah, I think orientate yourself in this world. And let's just be honest about it. There are basically no people out there that have mastered this. There's probably only like a handful of people in the world that have the entirety of the sound. So even though they've got like a level 5 audio note system or the best spectral gear or Negra or whatever, a lot of people that have stuff like that still aren't quite able to use it to its fullest potential. So recognizing these things will give you an edge. It will give you an edge. And yeah, we want to hear the spacing between the groups of the members of the orchestra, like the cellos versus the double basses, cellos, double basses. It shouldn't just be like an undefined thing here and there. You should actually be able to hear every single member of that cello and how they're playing slightly different compared to each other, and the clear separation where they end here and the microphone is here, and the double basses that they have their microphone here, but possibly that, even though you can hear the volume differentiation between the different guys playing the double basses, you should also be able to hear that some of their sound, even though it's separated from the cellos, some of the sound still travels over to these guys' microphones over here. That's stuff that you hear on really high quality good setups. And when you hear an instrument making the correct sound, you will just hear crazy stuff like the quality of the wood and the strings that are on it. You can hear if it's plastic strings from a toy store, or if it's like the normal stuff that sounds a bit dead, gray, and like it's dying, or if it's like really rare, I don't know, whatever, swan pelvis hair or whatever that they use. I have no idea what they're using, but you can hear stuff like that. Listen to stuff like Jiha Park and Itzhak Perlman. Listen to how they're playing that violin. There are not a lot of violinists out there that can play at that level. And when you get into a good sound system, you really get to hear the story of them getting into playing a violin, how it's deeply affecting their soul, and then there's a message that they want to tell you on stage, and it's urgent. It's urgent, and you have to listen to it. That's what you get with a good violinist. And like let me just see here. Yeah, like when you're hitting a drum, it's not gonna make like a dunk sound. You're gonna hear like the beat within the beat hitting the floor, compacting the sound, almost as if the drum grew and became a lot bigger instead of this like effect. That's, by the way, a problem that I have. Even me on my level, I have a problem, and I wouldn't say a lot of audio note people have that problem, but I've noticed that some users of audio note, that's one of the few problems that a lot of them have, is that they usually it's difficult to generalize, but some of them have that speaker very close to a floor that's overly active, and then they've probably got like a lot of glass surfaces. And if you haven't got full control over the gear, a good power bar, good power cables, good network to your streamer and everything, you can easily hear that over reactive, really high quality audio note type of sound can dramatize their inability to control the room. So I've heard that actually in a lot of audio note systems, and that's not saying that audio note is bad in any way. That's just a testament to how good it is that you can hear this like dunking bass instead of it going like do 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 do, instead of it having gears, where you're able to differentiate the actual depth of the drum being hit. So yeah, and that's a typical thing that happens when you have, for example, a really good audio note system, and you have or some other system, let's just say Negra, Spectral, whatever, and then you have like a half bad streamer on it, or a half bad streamer combined with like a half bad DAC with not having used any energy on the cables around that, then you just get like an over dramatized pumping effect. Or it might even be the opposite, that it's a certain product that wants to prevent that from happening, and what it does is the opposite. It suppresses the sound. It doesn't get out to you. It's kind of stuck at the speakers. A lot of people have these problems, and I have these problems to some degree. I also know other people that have really good systems that to some degree have those problems. It's just a question of recognizing the problem, figuring out, okay, what's the end destination? Okay, how can we gradually get to that level so you watching this video can slowly elevate yourself to a higher level? You don't necessarily have to use a hell of a lot of money on doing that, but just recognizing that fact gives you an edge compared to probably other people out there that probably have more money than you. You just being able to recognize that is a fantastic gift. That's like me giving you, like, here's 1,000, here's another 1,000, here's another 1,000. You being able to see that, to hear that, gives you an edge, and you won't have to fix problems like most people fix problems, where they're going from like a $5,000 to a $50,000 speaker, thinking that will solve their problems. Of course, it will solve a hell of a lot of problems, but if you still have a bad streamer, a bad DAC, and a bad room, you're in a way still amplifying those bad things. So you could, of course, compensate by getting a much big speaker that has a lot more slam, control, bass, and kick to it, and probably more naturally warm, but recognize the fact that you are still inheriting some of those problems and passing it on to that new gear if you're not solving the problem at its very core. And that's basically what the world is doing with a lot of stuff, you know. You see it in the health industry, the medicine industry, the IT industry. You know, I've been in the IT industry for many years, and I can tell you this. In the olden days, we would solve a problem a lot closer to the root. We would actually get our hands dirty. We would actually go in there and deal with components, replace components, do configurations, go into this and that menu. Nowadays, it's like I see this constantly, and Eli, the computer guy, also pointed this out many times, that, you know, the death of the IT industry, death of IT as a profession, I think he called it. It's the fact that we don't solve problems anymore at a root. We just provide a new product that to some degree solves that problem at some level, but in a way it's a sort of a trickery, because even though you're using a better product, many times that product is doing some level of compensating. So let's just say that you have a good sound here and now. Wouldn't it be good to be able to improve that sound by not actually upgrading the gear, but just improving the conditions that create that power coupling between the CD player and the amp, between the amp and the speaker? When we can control all of these elements, my God, will you just be able to tune into a whole other level of good sound. So yeah, I was just about to get into this. When you can hear on a good system if someone's just getting by in the orchestra by having good mechanics, or as I would call it, lip playing. That is one of the main things that define lower end gear. It's very much that it's fine, it's okay, it does a lot of cool stuff, you know, it does a lot of detail, it's very controlled, but in a way it's kind of too perfect, you know, it doesn't have this flawed human quality to it where there's full weight, full substance and soul that is just pulling your heart out, you know. And that's what a lot of the previous systems that I had, you know, I would never touch a random classical track and put that on when I had Yamaha Denon, Musical Fidelity, Vincent stuff, and I didn't have the best Yamaha Vincent Musical Fidelity stuff, but I had like the lower end to the mid end gear. And of course, I heard, for example, Vincent, Musical Fidelity, Yamaha, you know, those other top models of those brands, not in my own home, but I heard them at other places, at friends' places, shows, stuff like that, stores. And yeah, it always got better, but you could always hear on some of those brands that it did all the movements, it did all the detail, it all turned up on the radar. Where did I say this? I think I said this somewhere. I can't even find it. but I said this, that I think I wrote this somewhere in the text, that you can have detail, but you can also have detail where it just turns up and then just disappears again, and you don't know exactly what happened, you know. I think I have it somewhere here. You just want that deep experience of the weight, the substance, the soul, the story behind what they're playing, you know. And with a lot of systems, you just don't get that. So, and I also feel that many times it's almost as if many systems don't have the right bandwidth for like the camera that's showing us the music to kind of show the entire orchestra playing. It's almost as if you only get to see certain pieces, and then when you get up in quality of system, of course you get more meat, more detail, but you're still not seeing everything compared to each other. There's still some instruments that are just going like da 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 da, so you can't hear the instruments behind that instrument, and yeah, we want everything to just exist as an entirety, that is the important thing behind this message. And bad systems just play a lot of detail, overwhelming the listener, or the opposite, where it lacks a lot of detail. And a good system just makes all music relevant and everything happening in that track at the same time, while still having a stable volume, but still having a stable volume while like releasing it fully, giving that full thrack, but without you having to stress your ears. I've heard a lot of systems where, especially expensive systems, where the detail is so hyped, it's so so much energy that it sounds amazing, it sounds really good, but you're just, in the end, you're just mentally tired, because it feels like the music has just beaten you up, like you just went to a boxing club, and someone just beat you up while feeding you candy bars and cocaine and such, like giving you a kick. But that's not how hi-fi is supposed to be. It is supposed to be, to some degree, a bit ruthless and raw and faulty, but not to the degree where it mentally tires you. You have to be able to listen to music for 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 hours. If you haven't got that, if you think you've created a system that's got basically everything, but you can't listen to music for 3, 5, 8 hours, then you haven't reached the end destination. It still might be a pretty good system. I had that with my YBA system. That was one of the very best systems I ever had, and even though it was perhaps one of the top 1,000 systems in the world, I would still say that there were some small irregularities and things that made the sound just a bit too raw, too edgy, too much. I could still only listen to music for like 2 hours, and then I was just like mind blown. Like, oh, like a truck ran over me. But still, even though I had that problem, some of the best transistor sound in the world, I still wouldn't have wanted to trade it for the normal, top end Accuphase sound, or the normal top end Macintosh, Paslabs, Mark Levinson sound. Even though that those brands would do individual things a lot better, be a lot more solid, a lot more comfortable, a lot more power. Yeah, but for me, at least at that point when I had that system, it was important for me for once to really feel the music, having it in a way overwhelm me, because I had before that the Macintosh system, and it was in a way too good, it was in a way too controlled, not fully emotionally involved in the sound, and because I went from before the Macintosh, I had a lot of chaos. The Macintosh just gave me a lot of control, a lot of power, a lot of coolness, better timing. Everything was just a lot better. But I reached a point where that was not enough for me, where I felt that I got stuck on it. It was just too good to be true. And then I went over to YBA and modified YBA gear. I'll make a video about that. You can also click on that. I went over to my YBA gear, and it just opened up for this whole other level of emotional intelligence, where you just were crying when you were listening to music. It's just so heartbreaking and deep, and yeah, it was flawed, and it was pretty raw and out there. It wasn't a very normal stock store sound that you would hear. It wasn't. So where was I going with this? I noticed from that experience that there was a level above what I had, and I could have upgraded to something like Aquaphase, a bigger Macintosh or Past Labs or whatever, and I would have gotten a lot more power, control, firmness, slam, and it would have, to some degree, on some of those Macintosh systems, had become a lot more pleasant to listen to. But having that deep, emotional, intelligent sound, that's pretty difficult to get into. You have to get into some pretty artsy gear where they stop using traditional boards and traditional transistors, and have this long circuitry of components. You have to start then getting into gear that has a pretty short signal, and where we're talking about using components like Dual and Mundorf, Arduino parts, Kondo parts, stuff like that, before you really get into that, that fully connecting type of sound. So yeah, in conclusion, a good system makes all music relevant, so you have to hear it, so there's urgency. And if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot listen to a random piece of classical music from an album, from start to end, without feeling it pulling in you and going like, you have to listen to this, you have to listen to this, then it's not the type of music that is to blame, or a bad recording, or that is just not your taste. It's usually the gear. So I think a great example of something that just plays the music too damn well, so it's almost frustrating. For me, that was gear like Classe, and especially Plinius, Musical Fidelity, and Meitner. Those are brands that to some degree do a lot of good structure. They do a lot of good here and there. But what you notice with all of those brands is that, at least in my opinion, is that the relevancy, the true weight, the substance, the way that it pulls your heart out and makes everything matter. So you have to listen to it. I often found myself when I was listening to my friend's Meitner DAC that it was just too good to be true. It wasn't believable. It was a bit like listening to Led Zeppelin with autotune. It was too well timed. There wasn't enough grit, dirt, weight, inconsistent human-like way of hitting the drum. It was just too perfect, and that's what I'm trying to get to. That when you have everything doing its thing, and you're reaching the highest levels in audio, you have proper depth. I would say as the number one thing, where just everything gets to exists like it's supposed to. And I would say like the second best thing is probably proper warmth, proper deep warmth. When we usually can't play music, like we want to listen to classical music and we just can't listen to it because it's too gray, boring, irrelevant. We often do the thing that we go down in gear in order to create a more distorted, nice, warmy, tubey type of sound, and I had that sound, I had my tube guru sound, my Torhauger sound, my Macintosh tube sound, and to some degree that stuff really does a lot of good. But then you want to listen to structural music, and then it just in a way fails, and then you hear how bad the timing is and that it's not fully neutral, and you don't have that clear cut edgy type of detail that that hits the slam with it and the slam with it and the slam. So yeah, long video, kind of difficult way of explaining it, sorry guys, but I think I still covered everything, and I feel that this is kind of the truth about detail. Hard to digest, really hard to digest, but try and see if you can use it for some benefit. This is me logging out. Have a nice day. Bye.